Thanks for listening to the Replatform podcast, sponsored by Attract and Elastipath and hosted by me, James Rogers. Warm welcome to your first episode. We've put a lot of effort into creating content, bringing you really interesting guests, all free of charge. Help us keep it that way. Tell other people about the podcast if we get new listeners. Share our posts from LinkedIn and Twitter so you can amplify our reach. The best thing you can do if you haven't already is give us that rating on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever else you might be listening or watch it. So let me introduce this week's episode, and then I'll hand it back to our guest. So our topic is the evolution of generative AI for content personalization and e-commerce sites. So I think this is a really interesting area of AI because a lot has been talked around product recommendations, but there's a much wider piece to do on personalization on e-com. And today we're talking to Josh Scotton, who's a co-founder and CTO at one of the leading players in this area, so Personify. Some of you may have come across and some may already be customers. He's also editorial board member for Frontiers in AI. And for those of you who go back in the industry a few more years, have worked in fashion e-commerce, you might know him from his days of Truefit. So warm welcome, Josh. How you doing, sir?
Thanks, James. Nice to be here. I'm doing great. Thank you. Yeah.
Cool. So do you want to give people... So I was going to say, do you want to give people a bit of an introduction to what your role is, and also set the scene for what Personify is, so those who haven't come across it know exactly where it fits.
Yeah, okay. So what I did, Personify, I co-founded Personify. I've got a background in AI and user behavior research. And so we started Personify when we were working in the fashion industry, and we were trying to understand why people are buying particular items or why they're browsing particular items, mainly to give sort of fashion styling advice to the users in real time. And what we found is that personalization is very, at that time, and it still is relatively today, it's very about what are you doing right now? Are you looking at product A or product B? You know, are you looking at jeans? You're just going to get more jeans. But actually, your behavior across the entirety of your session and also your historic behavior can actually give more information as to the reason why you're coming to a website. You might be looking for an outfit for a wedding, or you might be just, buying some more jeans because you've just ripped your last pair. There's lots of different reasons for a user to come to a website, and it changes with each visit. And so understanding the context of the visit is incredibly important to personalizing anything really on the website. It might be, not just product recommendations, but the content and sometimes the layout of the website can be modified to engage the user more and personalize more individually to that user. So that's our goal at Personify, is to enable that for retailers and brands.
Right. And we'll come on to the content side a lot more later on. So first question, so can you talk us through kind of some of your R&D activity at the moment around generative AI and how that differs from some of the other solutions on the market, and maybe give us a few application examples?
Yeah, so what we do, the core of what we do at Personify is identifying different types of behaviors. So looking at, all of the traffic on a website and understanding, what kinds of reasons do people shop. And once we understand that, we can then start to map that to particular content. We can say, okay, this banner really engages well with people who are shopping for a holiday. And this is for somebody who's doing up their home and buying new furniture or new lighting. And so we sort of understand the different types of behaviors or shopping goals that a user might have. We map content onto that, and that then allows us to actually spot where the gaps are. So where particular groups of users aren't being served accurately or effectively. And this allows us, where we have been in terms of product so far, is that we identify those gaps and enable content management systems, the authoring process for CMSs to basically speed up that process and identify where the most effective content generation sort of effort should be placed. And when we get into AI generation, so generative AI and sort of content creation, it's very similar. You identify the gaps and you basically create content for those gaps. So one of those things is you can put in a lot of information around the context of the behavior. So you can say this person comes from these types of referrers, they are interested in these types of products and they're going to have these kinds of outcomes. And you can push that into generative AI and start to generate sort of content examples. So you can say, generate me a banner, generate me some copy. And so that's basically where our R&D is focused on, is creating that. The benefit of that is obviously you can use content generation to, at the moment, to do all of that. But it's the context and working out where the most effective use is. Because the reality of the situation is that nobody sort of says, go away and create content and then slaps it straight on the page, because there's a lot of variance in the quality. And so you not only have to generate it automatically, but you need a workflow which is streamlined to speed up the process of approving that content before it goes and hits the website. So when you're looking into sort of the R&D effort, it's not just identifying the gaps, which Personify does. It's not just creating the content to meet those gaps. It's also that approval work stream and making sure the whole process is joined up and simple to use. And that's where you get the best impact, because you are taking the whole process end to end and syncing it up. And that's where we're focused at the moment.
Crown Peak, enabling organisations to build meaningful digital experiences for everyone, everywhere. Engage your customers with our content management system, reach your entire audience with our digital accessibility and quality tools, and grow your brand with our product discovery solution. Find out more at crownpeak.com.
Great, yeah, super interesting. We've got a client that's done quite a lot with some of the generative AI solution to create like lifestyle content. And I think with the right kind of prompts, I think it is really powerful. So yeah, getting that right, I think would be super interesting for brand. So next question, to content personalization, I feel like it's often seen as like quite a big project, like quite a broad thing to kind of get right. What's your view on kind of the best starting point, and how do people usually get started with your product?
So content personalization, this is something I used to research when I was doing my PhD in education, is that we would create individual learning tutorials for individual users based on their previous knowledge. And it's very similar to what we actually do at Personify in terms of the content personalization. So I'll explain it a little bit more detail. Effectively, you might be talking about a certain topic, and you need to have an introduction. You need to have examples which fit the user's learning styles, and then you need conclusions which wrap it all up. And the problem with doing that, and that we found research at Warwick University, is that you had to create huge amounts of variations in terms of the content sort of fragments, we used to call them. And so you had a huge, the content space just exploded in the number of different items and all the metadata that you needed to tag it with. And that was the biggest research problem back then. Going forwards to retail, it's less complicated in terms of how things match together. When somebody comes to a landing page and you want to stick a banner on the top of the page, you don't have to make it sync with the rest of the page all the time. It just needs, people understand that there's different blocks. They're going to appeal to different users. The main thing is actually making something which appeals to them in prime position. And so you're more focused on sort of one content piece at a time when you're looking at landing pages. And then when you get into the rest of the journey, it's more about syncing those content pieces up so they are cohesive across the journey rather than necessarily cohesive across the page, especially early on in the journey where you're sort of trying to expand what you're showing to the users. So what that means practically is the number of content pieces or sort of content assets that you might put into a particular content slot on the page is a lot less than people might expect. So, if you've got a landing page and you've got like maybe 5 or 6 major groups of users, you're not going to need 20, 30 pieces of content. You can make do with like 3 or 4, because what you're trying to do is you're trying to personalize and get basically the most effective option in front of the user, which is better than the default. And that will start increasing your bounce, reducing your bounce rate, increasing your retention immediately. And you could do this with quite a low sort of content asset library. And what you can then do is identify where you're missing particular groups of customers, and then you just build the content on there. So it's not like we've got to create, 40, 50 pieces of content before we can even start this personalization. You can actually start quite small and then scale up. And what we normally do when we're working with clients is we'll say, okay, look, we've done this behavior review. You've got these types of customers, these types of personas which match maybe what you already know and some that you don't. And you then take that information and say, okay, well, we're going to hit the major traffic points first. We're going to look at the content that you already have and repurpose it and basically use the personalization capability to show the right thing to the user, maybe rearrange some of the blocks on the landing pages, that kind of thing. And that enables you to start going straight away. And then what we'll then do is use a test and learn approach. So we basically say, okay, how effective is this? Do we want to improve it? Which users need to be targeted next? And that allows you to roll it out incrementally, but still see improvements in your metrics at each stage. And so you can start quite small. People get very scared when they talk about content personalization and one-to-one personalization because it seems like a really far away sort of goal to what they are right now. But you can actually start to achieve really good things with almost what you have already if you just have the right smarts behind it.
Go on. Question related to that, because that sounds interesting. Yeah, definitely think people have struggled in the past when they've seen personalization as it's all one-to-one, it's customer, as opposed to, well, actually, let's do it based on the behavioral group. So I think that's quite an interesting way of simplifying it initially. How do you get to the level of knowledge of where to focus on? Because the user journeys vary massively, and you look at large sites and like the user journeys, and there are potentially hundreds of thousands of different ones. How do you get to know which user journeys to focus on? How much of that is like automated, I guess, in terms of you ingest analytics data and then you already know what core user journeys and which pages? That'd be really interesting to understand how you get to that level of knowing where to focus.
Yeah. So in terms of like the user journeys, that it has been a stumbling block to actually creating sort of automatic segmentation for a very long time. Lots of people, you could create segments automatically all day long using about 100 different sort of algorithms. But actually the hardest part has been to be where the bar is set, where you draw the line between this is now irrelevant and this is actually useful. And so a lot of people have gone too small. And a lot of people have gone too big, and it's always finding that fine line. And what you find is that a lot of data science capabilities within larger organizations optimize it manually for their particular retailer brand. And that works. But when they then try to transport that to sort of translate that across to another brand or basically make it more general purpose, that's where it sort of starts to break down. What we found is we use a custom a proprietary sort of algorithm that we use to identify the behaviors. That's our sort of secret sauce. That's what I brought to the table when we started. And what this allows us to do is we're looking at it in terms of not necessarily specific behavior. We're not saying, you go to red jeans and then, red shirts, then these jeans, and then you check out, but more sort of a little bit a step back in terms of grouping like some of those thousands of journeys together and finding the commonality between the journeys. And what that enables you to do is you might have people coming in from lots of different referral places, but parts of the journey are very common. And you might have branching sort of areas in those journeys where they sort of diverge from the norm, but that's basically captured within that particular behavior. And what we find is that when you look at this, it might be you have some sort of like categories. Sometimes they're colors. With some customers with women's wear, you start to find, okay, this is really bold. Red and black colors, or these are palettes. Sort of pastel colors, or they might be looking for a different reason. They might be looking at combinations of items to buy an outfit. And then you're looking at, these people are looking for either jumpsuits or flowing trousers and a top. Or if you go to electronics, it might be these people are really technical. So they always look at these high-end spec, and there's a reason why they look at these particular sets of customers in combination. So the algorithm picks that up, and basically you start to see themes. They're not all the same. It's not like, these are your outfitting journeys. It's like this is an outfitting journey. This is a color-driven journey, and it identifies the driver for the user behind the journey rather than the really granular detail in the journey itself. And that's the reason that you can then start to apply it across the user journey, because if you understand the driver for a particular user, you can start to actually show content related to that, and then also products which are related to it, and also the outcome, which might not be a conversion. It might be a newsletter sign up, or it might be getting somebody to interact with a questionnaire, or download a coupon for some of our CPMG clients in the States. There's lots of different ways that you can then sort of tweak the journey and sort of interact with the user later on, depending on their shopping drivers.
Elastic Path is on a mission to break through the barriers that prevent commerce leaders from delivering extraordinary shopping experiences. Both business and tech teams are able to innovate on their own terms, fully embrace composability, and in turn, never compromise on what's possible. Learn more at www.elasticpath.com.
Yeah, I like that thinking as well, because there are so many different tracking sources, and often people customize content based purely on source, but actually the behavior can be similar between multiple sources, and therefore you're picking out the commonality of behaviors regardless of which campaign it's come from. Yeah, I like that. That makes perfect sense. A question that then comes on from that, which a lot of people ask is, well, actually, if I'm going to use like a content personalization engine, then I need a team of people to make use of this, and to make sure we got the right assets, and that we're analysing, understand the behaviours, and making the right decisions in these workflows. Can you talk us through, from the customers you work, like what sort of resources do they typically need in-house to work alongside Personify to make the most out of the platform? What type of roles, or how big are the teams user?
Yeah, so in terms of it depends on their strategy. Some of our clients have taken the sort of landing page optimization and saying, okay, we're going to hit banners, and that's what we're going to do with content personalization. And what they'll do is they'll take the behavior information that we have. So they'll look at recent behavior, and they'll say, okay, we know that, we have like 20% of customers are really interested in sports. We know that the majority, though, are going to be just interested in loungewear. And we've got these really specific segments, which just due to seasonality, they're really important right now. They'll then look at that behavior and look at the content that they already have created, identify gaps, and then create content for that. So it goes into their existing sort of content creation workflow, but they are targeted better. So it's not necessarily increasing the time taken. In fact, it can decrease it, because then they know they don't need to recreate lots of stuff which isn't actually relevant right now, but it makes them work smarter. So that's one way. The other way is that people might say, okay, we really want to personalize. So we work with a brand in healthcare with pain medication, and obviously content for regulated spaces like that is quite hard, because you have to go through legal approvals and other things like this. So that's always going to take some time, but they're working in terms of, we are going to target different types of content depending on whether we think somebody's got ongoing pain, or whether it's maybe a sports injury, maybe whether they're an older demographic or a younger demographic. And so what they looked at is we took a project. So they had some of their agency resources and some internal resources, not new resources, but just more of that time. And they basically said, okay, these are our high traffic points. These are the critical sort of points in the journey from the information that they got from us. I said, okay, we want to change some of the, we need to create some additional content in terms of articles to meet these particular goals, because they're not served well. And we also need to create different variants of banners. So there might be an article about yoga, and we might show somebody who's maybe looks a little bit more sporty, for people who have got a sports injury. And if you've got arthritis, then we're going to put a picture of maybe an image of a class that might appeal, a yoga class that might appeal to those types of users more. And so basically switching out this content as well as putting actually additional copy on the site. So that is a sort of new content added. That's sort of an extra additional project which you can do. So that's where you're sort of going, okay, we're not just focusing on improving the intelligence in our workflow, but we're also saying, okay, we're looking at the whole website and we're actually building new things for it. So that's sort of additional work on top, and that can be met either by prioritizing things in your workflow and repurposing existing sort of resources, or actually sort of like creating a new project, as this customer did with their agency, to actually kick this off. So those are the sort of two styles that we've had predominantly with customers so far.
And next question. So automatic segmentation is one of your key features. How is the platform kind of defining the segments and kind of keeping them meaningful, given the amount of kind of, routes that could be gone down here?
Yeah, so as I talked before about in terms of the drivers behind behavior, that's the main thing in terms of creating them and working out whether they're improved. We do a lot. We have a lot of smarts behind the scenes in terms of looking at whether, when we create a segment, whether it's relevant to the traffic. So we can basically, when we create the segment, which is a behavior, so the behavior maps to a segment, we can then sort of play it back through traffic, make sure that it's still accurate in terms of predicting that traffic's behavior. So for every sort of behavior that we recognize, we can also give it a score in terms of accuracy and then track it in real time as new traffic comes through. What that allows you to do is basically you have an accuracy error tracker, and when it hits a certain threshold, you can say, okay, this actually is no longer relevant. We need to get rid of that, and then look at the traffic that was mapped to that and see if it needs to be mapped to either existing behaviors or needs to create new ones again. So you basically have this fairly organic flow in terms of these behaviors, in terms of working out whether they're still valid, working out whether we need to create new ones, and that's part of the sort of differentiation with Personify in terms of it's not just a one-off sort of behavior identification piece and then you have to redo that constantly, but it's an always-on sort of automatic piece. And that doesn't mean that it changes a lot. A lot of behaviors will stay constant. When you talk about automatic segmentation and it's always sort of identifying different behaviors, people go, oh, wait, so I've actually got to do more work to keep on top of these things and how they sort of translate to my existing personalization strategy. It's actually less than you'd think. If you're, say, electronics or you're in healthcare, your behaviors aren't going to change dramatically. They're going to adjust to behaviors as they come on. The behaviors will change and get modified slightly. But the biggest sort of area is actually fashion, where you go through seasons, where you'll have some behaviors which are what we call evergreen. They're always on. They're always going to be there. But then you have, you go into winter, you suddenly start seeing behaviors around winter coats. Where you get into summer and you suddenly start to see, swimwear pick up again. So that's generally where you get most change in the segmentation, but that happens at a manageable pace. And we don't find that clients are struggling to sort of stay on top of that. It sort of naturally fits in when they sort of change strategic goals anyway, because they know that behavior is going to change when you get into summer or when they release a brand new product line. So they're ready for that. They're geared up for that.
That makes sense. And how does something that James noted down here was the propensity to buy scoring. And can you just talk us through how that works and what you're kind of tracking beyond just PDP views and cart events and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, so when you look at some of the behaviors that we're recognizing, if you go to retail, you get a lot of behaviors where people are just browsing. So people might have come from a referrer, which is more of an introductory referrer to a brand, let's say, and it drives behavior where people explore a lot, but they don't actually buy. But when you dig deeper into this, so Personify is an anonymous tracking platform and personalization platform. We can do this without any data about the users. But when you do add identification of the users across multiple behaviors, you find that those behaviors are exploratory and they give rise to other behaviors later on, maybe a couple of days later or next week, which is actually more driven to purchase. And so these are actually two different behaviors. You'll have exploratory, where they're looking at like lots of different products, making sure that you have got products in the categories that they want to buy, etc. And then they'll come back like 2-3 days later, and this is when they're actually ready to buy. So when you're talking about propensity to buy score, you're actually looking at, okay, for the behavior that we're mapping this user to, is it actually likely that they're going to convert? And if they are going to convert, what conversion point is it? Is it going to be a checkout? Is it going to be a newsletter sign up? Is it going to be a sort of a non-financial but still important in terms of engagement thing that we're trying to drive here? And so that allows you to say, okay, for this user on this behavior, they're probably 0.5% likely to buy. Another user on another behavior, they might be 10% likely to buy in terms of, because they're on that behavior. You can then look at where they are on that journey. So are they actually right at the start of the journey, or have they got most of the way through to the conversion point? And that's when your propensity scoring then can ramp up. So you can say, okay, this user is 0.5% likely to convert, but they're actually on a leg of this journey, which is actually really close to a conversion point. So their propensity to buy is actually 20%. Whereas this other user, where the average conversion point is going to be like 10%, they're actually right at the start. So they're actually 1% likely to buy in the next couple of steps because they haven't really got going yet. So that's where the propensity to buy happens, because you actually look at the individual behavior and then where they are to actually calculate that score. And that allows you to say, okay, they've actually added loads of stuff to cart, but they're actually doing that because they're basically making a short list. They're nowhere near buying yet. So their propensity to buy and showing checkout offers isn't really going to help. So you can use that kind of smarts to figure out where somebody is.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so essentially, you're continuously responding to the behaviour and the machine learning of how that behaviour corresponds towards an endpoint purchase to upgrade that percentage rating. And I have interest on that.
Yeah, exactly.
So I know a few other data companies where analytics companies have a propensity to purchase, which is then surfacing businesses can make marketing automation decisions on, do they follow up with campaigns? Do they follow up with discounts? Do you can businesses override or set any controls around the propensity score, or is that purely algorithmically driven?
We have the ability to customize the scoring level. So you've got a couple of levers that you can pull in terms of the sort of weighting that you can give to particular types of action. And we do have we have done a bit of work because that changes per sector. So people who are sort of you're not going to have the same sort of scoring if you're working with an airline versus somebody who works in retail, and luxury fashion is going to be very different from fast fashion. So there are sort of the algorithm can work out the best kind of weighting, but then we can go in and override that. We don't normally recommend that because we recommend taking the output from Personify and then pushing it into existing systems to then do your overriding if you wanted to, because that allows you to keep Personify as a decisioning engine, which you can then weight with other inputs. So if you're at the stage where you actually have people who are smart enough to do the weightings, then you actually are probably doing a multi-algorithm personalization strategy where you're taking in several different things. You might be using Personify's. Some customers use us for the unknown customers. So we go, okay, this is we don't know this customer. This is Personify's suggestion, and then they'll have a completely different machine learning algorithm for known customers, which then they can mix the two. So we talk about sort of layered personalization in that way, where you sort of take the behavior bit from Personify, which is like the real-time context, and then you add in sort of historic data, sort of user profiling from your CDP, and all of that kind of stuff can be merged together.
Yeah, nice. I like that. And a question I've got, because we talked about the generative AI and sort of like auto generation of content based on behaviors. Now, obviously, a lot of businesses have an existing CMS where they do all their content editing, publishing, and that's where they would have an established workflow pushing content into e-commerce. Can you talk, so how does Personify work when there's an existing CMS? It might be a native page builder, might be a headless CMS like an Advent or a story. What does that integration part work look like for auto generation, getting it into a workflow for approval and then being published up to productions?
Yeah. So I'll talk about the Amplience integration actually, because we work with them directly with an out-of-the-box integration. So we, Personify as a business, our unique sort of USP is identifying behavior and then being able to leverage that through your digital estate. We massively into the headless space with the Mac Alliance and other sort of organizations. And when we come to content management systems, Personify has to be able to deliver end-to-end personalization out of the box, because some of our customers don't have all of these different pieces, or they might have missing gaps within their CMS or within their CDP that we have to plug in and fill. So our strategy as a business is not necessarily to replace a lot of the existing stuff that you have, but basically either supercharge them or integrate and basically make them smarter. With Amplience, what we do is they have content slots, and we have a Personify integration, which allows us to say, okay, we're creating this banner for this content area. We're creating another variant. We're saying, okay, this is targeted at sports. This is targeted at, lifestyle. And what Personify will do with the integration into Amplience is basically, okay, for this content slot, you've got 3 variants. They're targeted at different types of behaviors, which have been integrated into Amplience through Personify. And we'll then say, okay, you're going to hit 45% of the people who will actually view this with relevant data. So you actually need to create some more stuff. And so that's the integration into Amplience will actually go and say, okay, for the users who are going to hit this page, you're going to hit 45% of them with these. But if you create something which is targeted at dogs, you're going to hit another 20% of your traffic. So you should really go and do that. And that's basically the flow that we have when we integrate into the CMS. Everything else from that point is exactly the same. They'll then push it into they'll push it into Shopify or whatever sort of platform that they're pushing it into, Salesforce, etc. And they'll then have a little bit there, which then will call out to get the behavior from Personify in real time to do the decisioning of what to show. But the actual flow in terms of content creation is exactly the same. And so we're looking at sort of how we can integrate into those workflows and sort of create custom sort of integration points, which will provide the information. We'll obviously have to create the workflow for ourselves as well, because we'll need some rudimentary sort of flow to go through the approval process. But the idea is not necessarily to replace the full CMS. We don't want to become a CMS, because that's a whole different business. The idea is that we can create those points into content management systems and enable users to basically use the information from Personify to actually through the workflow approval process or the content generation piece. So we could, with generative AI, it's a bit about, hey, you need to create this type of content, and we can give you the prompt to use to actually go and create that. And that will then speed up the actual interactions with generative AI as well.
That makes sense. I think that, sounds like a sensible route. I had a question on reporting and understanding the impact of some of this kind of personalization, and particularly kind of as you go more into the kind of generative AI space. Like, how do you measure the kind of positive and negative impact and like report back to the end user?
So that's a challenge always, because you get the whole there's lots if you're showing different product recommendations, you can track click through and sort of and you can obviously track the end metrics as well, and you can say, okay, this is working better, people are clicking through better. The issue is that your goal for metrics should be long-term customer engagement, and that's quite a nebulous term, and people struggle to measure that anyway. And even when they can, it's quite hard to, it takes a long time to measure. So you're generally looking at sort of short-term objectives, which are generally like conversion rates. If a lot of the time when we're tracking existing personalization that we will generate for customers, we're looking at A/B testing and basically looking at sort of end metrics, because even with things like product recommendations, you can have a really great click-through rate, but no purchases generated off the back of that. So you always need to look at sort of your final metrics and make sure that that's working well. But in terms of the generative AI, it's a bit harder because the content asset creation is a lot further removed from the actual impact. So when you're saying, okay, we're using Personify to increase, to identify the gaps, you then create the assets, and then several steps later, you're putting them in place. The only way that you're effectively going to be able to test directly whether it's working or not is actually to A/B test that and basically go, okay, content which would have been the usual approach versus content using the Personify approach. And most companies don't have the resources to do that. And even if they do, they don't want to, because it basically means completely separating the chain of content and basically having two different streams to go in and saying, this is our normal approach, this is Personify's approach, and then and managing that. So it's quite a challenge to actually directly track the impact. What we normally suggest to do is look at, we can split out users by behavior. We know which ones aren't served by content that you have at the moment, so we can report on individual behaviors and users and how they change relative to others which are served well. So if you've got somebody who's shopping, if you've got really good content created at people who are shopping for sofas on a website, and their conversion rate is like, say, 5%. And then you've got another group which Personify has identified as content is not so good. And you go through the generative content creation approach, and, it increases their conversion rate from 2% to 4%. Then you can start to say, okay, Personify is actually making a big difference in this particular area. And so that's where you can start to sort of, it's not as scientifically correct because you're looking at before, after cohorts, but it's a lot easier to do practically without having a lot of effort to split things up. So you can test cohorts side by side. So that's generally where you'd be looking at sort of identifying where the Personify is working because of that sort of targeted effect.
That makes sense. I guess, clients are doing their own reporting about like engagement metrics and everything else. So I guess that kind of supports it.
Yeah, if you're doing content for call to actions, you can track that a lot more effectively than if you're just creating copy and slapping it in the middle of the page. Because unless you have an interaction opportunity with the content that you're creating, then it's a lot harder to track.
Yeah, that makes sense. And what verticals are typically best for your business? And have you got kind of a really good client example where you've had a really high proven impact?
So because Personify can work across the entire journey on the content and the product space, some of our best customers have had some really good sort of results across both the content they're creating, so blog content, sort of authority written pieces for SEO purposes, and then the actual retail store attached to that. It's generally people where it's not necessarily a specific vertical. It's where people are creating basically a lot of content to drive acquisition into a retail store. So one company which is a great example of this would be Moon Audio, based in the States, and they sell electronics. So they sell really expensive headphones, DACs, so digital sort of digital audio connectors, and they're really great at basically doing customized cables, which are, you might have a £5,000 pair of headphones, but if you use a really cheap cable, it's not going to sound any better than a cheap pair. So you have to make sure your whole flow of your headphones to your recording desk, and all of the cables attached are all at the same quality. And that's basically the space that Marine Audio provide. Now, they attract customers who are luxury customers who just really want an expensive brand of high quality headphones, and they care more about the label. They care about the visual aspects. They're very visual shoppers when they come onto Marine Audio. And the other type of users are more your technical users. They're recording artists or people who really, got home cinema setups and really care about the quality of the music they're listening to. And they care a lot about the specifications. They don't really care they care what it looks like, but less so. And so you have these two very different types of users, but then you have the site is very different as well. You have lots of blog and magazine articles. They write reviews and sort of guides for some of the equipment that they sell, which is better than the manufacturer's content. And so you get lots of users go onto the site to read up. And so they have huge amounts of customers where you'll have people who are exploring the content, and basically the brand is prime position, is really well suited in the space, as this is an authority on audio equipment. And so when you've got Personify, these kind of things where people are just browsing to buy and people are browsing to read and find information, you can leverage Personify to its full potential, because you can start to say, okay, these users aren't going to buy yet, but they are really interested in these types of brands. We're going to push videos, we're going to push content, we're going to push them to Marine Audio University and sort of their education portal. And 90% of those users will never buy from Marine Audio, but quite a lot of users will, but they might buy later. And so you basically have the opportunity to really engage and then convert when you can see those markers in their journeys where they'll go onto the retail side. And when you get into the retail side, then you've got all of the standard sort of, product recommendations, social proofing, all of those kind of messages. But then you have the ability on the product pages to say, okay, we're going to show you lots of visual stuff if you're a luxury customer, and we're going to show you all of the specification data and push the manuals and the interoperability data for those users who are technical. So you can start to actually change the layout of product pages to suit the type of customer. And so that would be a good sort of example of, you've got lots of content, you've got really detailed product pages, you've got the standard sort of retail space. Personify can sort of hit every single use case that Personify can sort of implement in that space, and that's a good customer. So that would be the sort of sweet spot. But you can, listening to that example, you probably can think of quite a few different retailers or brands or use cases which you'd actually work quite well with outside of that vertical. So it's not really vertical specific. It's more like this is a sort of, you've got the content to optimize as well as the retail to optimize as well as the product data. So you're sort of optimizing across the entirety of not just the individual per session behaviors, but the entire lifetime of the customer you can optimize across.
I really like that whole idea of restructuring content based on people's needs and interests, because there's so long pages like PDPs have been, you look at the eye tracking data on it, and there are so many like loose spots where stuff is not being read, but there's content lower down that the people want, but it's a static template for everybody. And that ability to take logic at a personalization level and feed that in and to dynamically change the page template, the back of it, to suit that particular user's behavioral needs. I think it's such a smart way of making pages more relevant to individual users.
Yeah, and we can do that quite freeform, which we do with Marine Audio, but we're actually rearranging a lot of the stuff on the fly, and it's quite dynamic. And then we're working with other customers who are sort of more in they like a more curated approach to their content. And so we're looking at personalization around creating different page templates and then just switching templates rather than sort of automatically chopping and changing. So there's sort of lots of implementation practices to sort of suit your sort of your trust in AI effectively.
Yeah, and I think the great thing now with the modern platforms being far easier, even with native page builders, to set up different templates to suit different products. being able to have those multiple templates there, that then a personalization engine can push the right info to say, right, okay, this is the template you're going to need because this is the customer. Now serve that to this end. Great. Josh, that's been really interesting. We covered all that. We could go on for ages, actually, because this is a topic that I absolutely love. And I'm sure there'll be more conversations to come, but you've given a lot of really useful information about how the platform works, the role that generative AI and personalization of content is having in e-com. I would imagine that there'll be people with specific questions going, I want to do this, or how would it work here? If people want to reach out and probe further or even challenge on any of this, how should they connect with Sonify?
Yeah, and if you want to connect, then drop a email to us. You can either get in contact for our website, which is www.PersonifyXP.com, or you can drop me a message. I'm josh@PersonifyXP.com.
Amazing. Thanks very much for your time. I really enjoyed this. I've loved watching the story of Personify's kind of growth accelerate. And there's some very interesting clients you've got on your books, like Love Honey. I imagine there's quite a lot of interest in personalisation, the segmentation stuff in there for sure. Thanks everyone for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. So keep an ear open for the next episode. And don't forget to give us that rating wherever you listen to iTunes where you go. Thanks very much, everyone. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host, Paul Rogers, via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.